The Boeing 787 Dreamliner, a marvel of modern engineering, had long been celebrated as a paragon of safety, its sleek composite frame cutting through the skies with a record unblemished by tragedy. Until June 12, 2025, when the unthinkable shattered that pristine reputation. Air India Flight 171, a Dreamliner bound for the stars, plummeted to the earth in a fiery catastrophe just moments after takeoff from Ahmedabad, India. The crash, the first fatal incident involving a 787, sent shockwaves through the global aviation community, not merely for its loss of life, but for the chilling questions it unearthed. When investigators pried open the scorched black boxes, expecting answers, they found instead a labyrinth of mysteries that would redefine the stakes for an entire industry. What they uncovered wasn't just a mechanical failure, it was a clarion call, a warning that the systems humanity had come to trust could betray in ways unimaginable. The wreckage lay strewn across the Ahmedabad runway, a chaotic mosaic of twisted metal and shattered dreams. Recovery teams, battling through the acrid smoke and structural debris, worked with grim determination under the oppressive June sun. By June 13th, less than 24 hours after the disaster, they located the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, both battered but intact, their orange casings a stark contrast against the charred remains. These devices, the silent sentinels of every flight, held the promise of truth. Under police escort, they were whisked to a high-security aviation laboratory in New Delhi, where India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, AAIB, awaited. But this was no solitary endeavor. Within a day, experts from the United States National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and the United Kingdom's Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AAIB, arrived, their presence mandated by the Chicago Convention, an international treaty that binds nations to collaborate when their citizens, manufacturers, or aircraft are involved in a crash. The Boeing 787 was American-made, and British nationals were among the 171 souls lost. This investigation was a rare, multinational crucible, its outcome poised to reverberate across continents. Inside the sterile walls of the New Delhi lab, the black boxes were handled with the reverence of sacred relics. The flight data recorder, capable of logging over 2,200 parameters, offered a digital autopsy of the aircraft's final moments. The cockpit voice recorder, preserving the last 2 hours of audio, promised a window into the pilot's desperate struggle. As investigators began their work, the data painted a harrowing picture. Just 22 seconds after takeoff, the command "Gear up" crackled through the cockpit, confirmed by the co-pilot with professional calm. But then a chilling pause. A warning chime pierced the air, followed by another, then the unmistakable wail of a stall warning. The cockpit erupted into a flurry of overlapping commands, urgent yet eerily composed as the pilots fought an invisible enemy. The aircraft inexplicably refused to climb. Its angle of attack, the critical angle between a wing and the oncoming air, was too steep, its lift vanishing despite engines roaring at full thrust. A single calm mayday cut through the chaos, followed by silence, broken only by the futile sounds of a crew battling to wrest control from a machine that had already betrayed them. What stunned investigators was not just the speed of the disaster, but the pilots' composure in the face of it. They had no time to comprehend the magnitude of what they were up against, no chance to unravel the cascade of failures unfolding within the aircraft's systems. The flight data revealed the first devastating clue. Just 14 seconds after takeoff, the flaps, critical surfaces that generate lift during low-speed flight, had fully retracted. This was catastrophic. At such an early stage, with airspeed insufficient to sustain flight, retracting the flaps stripped the wings of their ability to hold the plane aloft. The Dreamliner stalled, its nose pitching upward as it clawed at the sky, only to plummet back to Earth. Yet the cockpit instruments, the pilot's trusted eyes, displayed a lie. The flaps were still extended, feeding the crew a false sense of security. They believed their aircraft was configured for a safe climb, unaware that the wings were crippled, their lift stolen by a silent malfunction. In those fleeting seconds, the pilots were not just fighting gravity, they were battling a machine that had turned against them. The revelation sent ripples of dread through the aviation world. Fingers pointed swiftly at Boeing, the American aerospace giant already scarred by a litany of scandals. The echoes of the 737 MAX crashes of 2018 and 2019 loomed large. Those tragedies driven by software failures that misled pilots and claimed 346 lives. The year 2025 had already been a crucible for Boeing. In January, a 737 MAX 9 made headlines when a door plug component blew out at 16,000 feet above Oregon, tearing a gaping hole in the cabin wall. Investigators found that critical bolts had never been installed, a glaring oversight that forced the resignation of Boeing's CEO and prompted the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, to freeze MAX production. Then in May, a Boeing 737-200 cargo jet was shot down over Darfur, its entire crew lost in a tragedy unrelated to mechanical failure, but adding fuel to a narrative of a company under siege. Now, the Air India 171 crash, the first fatal loss of a Dreamliner, marked the third major Boeing incident in 6 months. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Whispers of deeper systemic issues grew louder. A Boeing whistleblower, who had spent years sounding alarms about ignored safety warnings, was found dead in a hotel parking lot earlier that year. His death officially ruled a suicide. Yet within the aviation community, skepticism festered. Many refused to call it a coincidence, seeing instead a chilling thread connecting rushed production, overlooked defects, and a corporate culture that seemed to prioritize profit over safety. The Dreamliner, though distinct from the 737 MAX, was now tainted by the same specter: automation arrogance. Critics argued that Boeing's reliance on complex, supposedly fail-safe systems had created a dangerous blind spot, leaving pilots ill-equipped to override or even detect catastrophic malfunctions. For Flight 171, the faulty flap indication pointed to a failure in either a sensor or an actuator, feeding erroneous data to the cockpit and masking the true state of the aircraft's wings. The 787's flap control system, designed with redundant torque motors and encoders, was meant to be impervious to such failures. Yet as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered troubling details. Unconfirmed reports from within the industry suggested that just 1 month before the crash, the left-wing flap actuator on the doomed aircraft had been serviced due to reports of sluggish retraction. Parts were replaced, but supply chain shortages meant not all components were new. Some were refurbished, technically within tolerance, but carrying the wear of previous use. More disturbingly, a torque sensor calibration check had reportedly been deferred during the service window, a routine oversight that was not flagged for immediate follow-up. On paper, these were minor lapses, the kind that aviation maintenance logs might dismiss as inconsequential. In reality, they may have been the first dominoes in a deadly cascade. Investigators began to suspect that this single point of failure, a miscalibrated sensor or a sluggish actuator, had misled the aircraft's computer systems. The auto throttle, designed to adjust engine power based on the plane's configuration, responded as if the flaps were extended, delivering thrust for a climb that the wings could not sustain. The angle of attack spiraled, and the stall became inevitable. The aircraft, its systems, and its pilots were all deceived by a lie embedded in the machine's own logic. The implications were chilling. The safeguards that defined the Dreamliner's cutting-edge design had not merely failed, they had actively misled. The aircraft believed it was flying correctly. The pilots believed they were in control. Neither was true. Public outrage erupted, fueled by a growing distrust in Boeing's once sterling reputation. Whistleblowers, some of whom had worked at Boeing's Charleston plant, where many 787s were assembled, came forward with damning claims. They spoke of rushed production lines, skipped inspections, and a corporate culture where cost-cutting trumps safety. The FAA's Organization Designation Authorization ODA program, which controversially allowed Boeing employees to oversee safety certifications, came under renewed scrutiny. A former Boeing engineer, speaking anonymously to international media, described the situation as a systemic failure at every level, from design to delivery. The crash of Flight 171 was not just a tragedy, it was a symptom of a deeper malaise. The international response was swift and uncompromising. Within days, the FAA issued an urgent bulletin to all U.S.-registered 787 operators, mandating immediate rechecks of flap position encoders and torque motor feedback circuits. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency, EASA, followed suit, echoing the call for rigorous inspections. In India, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, DGCA, ordered a comprehensive audit of all 787 Dreamliners in the country, grounding 4 aircraft for deep system checks. 2 of those jets revealed anomalies in flap motor performance, though none as severe as the one that doomed Flight 171. Still, the findings were enough to sound alarm bells across the industry. The Tata Group, Air India's parent company, responded with a vow of transparency, pledging a fleet-wide inspection protocol that exceeded the DGCA's requirements. Behind closed doors, sources suggested the company was reeling, not just from the loss of life, but from the existential threat to the Dreamliner's reputation as the cornerstone of Indian aviation's future. The human toll, however, cast the longest shadow. The crash claimed 171 lives, including 33 people on the ground, their homes and livelihoods obliterated in the inferno. The Tata Group announced a crisis support fund offering 1 crore rupees, roughly $120,000, to each victim's family, alongside counseling, long-term medical aid for the sole survivor, and relocation assistance for those displaced. But no amount of compensation could erase the grief. 3 weeks after the black box analysis, a preliminary report emphasized that while pilot error could not be entirely ruled out, the investigation's focus remained on mechanical and systemic failures. Boeing issued a global maintenance advisory urging operators to verify flap actuator feedback encoders and close out any deferred maintenance tasks involving flap systems. Yet for many, these measures felt like too little, too late. Aviation analysts warned that Boeing's brand, already battered, faced a precipice. The company's stock dipped noticeably, and the Dreamliner's once impeccable safety record began to crumble under the weight of public doubt. The crash also reignited a broader debate about automation in aviation. Pilot unions and flight instructors worldwide called for a renewed emphasis on manual flying skills, arguing that the industry's growing reliance on automated systems had left pilots unprepared for rare but catastrophic malfunctions. Over the past decade, as aircraft like the 787 became marvels of digital precision, training programs had increasingly prioritized systems management over raw flying instinct. Associations began lobbying for updated curricula that would equip pilots to handle misleading cockpit data or fly without automation when necessary. The stakes were clear. In the case of Flight 171, the pilots had mere seconds to recognize and override a system that had already doomed them. The question was not just whether they could have acted differently, but whether any human could have. As the investigation pressed forward, forensic engineers continued to pore over recovered components and digital data streams, piecing together the final moments of Flight 171. A full report was not expected until November, nearly 5 months after the crash, leaving families, survivors, and the public in agonizing limbo. Among them was the lone survivor, a young man seated in 11A, who emerged from the wreckage with injuries that paled in comparison to the weight of his loss. His younger brother, seated just across the aisle, did not survive. The survivor's grief was broadcast to the world as he carried his brother's coffin during a funeral that drew global attention, his face etched with a sorrow that spoke of survivors' guilt and unanswerable questions. "If I had known, I would have switched seats," he later told a reporter, his words a haunting refrain that captured the human cost of the tragedy. The crash of Air India Flight 171 was more than a singular event. It was a mirror held up to an industry, a company, and a world that had placed unwavering faith in technology. If the final report confirms what early findings suggest, that a flawed sensor, misleading data, or deferred maintenance triggered the disaster, Boeing will face more than lawsuits. It will confront a reckoning. After the 737 MAX crises, the company vowed reform, promising to prioritize safety over all else. Yet if critical failures persist in its most advanced aircraft, Boeing risks losing the one asset no aerospace giant can survive without: trust. The families of the 171 victims, the survivor wrestling with guilt, and the millions who board planes every day deserve more than promises. They deserve answers, accountability, and the assurance that the skies, once a symbol of human triumph, will not betray them again.